8. This is Stacey Weemers here, back. Great to see so many familiar faces logging in. We're about to get started with a wonderful session with Krishna Kumar. Krishna will be talking to us today about the dimensions of trust, building on from his pre-summit session that he hosted with us in June this year. And so we are about 1 minute early. I'll give you all time to log in and get settled. For those of you logging in now, if you just want to use that Q&A box, I'm curious, who attended Krishna's session in June, earlier this year? Thank you all. We've got people joining from Toronto and Germany and Switzerland, Milan. We've got quite a few people here that did attend in June, so that's great. This will be a nice deeper dive into the content for you. Thank you everyone for sharing that. Great to see so many of you here with us this morning. Okay, so welcome everyone to week 8 of the WBECS Full Summit. It is Stacey Weemers here, and I am delighted to have the next 90 minutes with you, our wonderful coaching community. And of course, our speaker today, Krishna Kumar. Krishna will be speaking to us about transforming through trust, how coaches can induce powerful change using 5 dimensions of trust. And so I will introduce Krishna in just a moment. And I will let you know too that now that we are almost a couple of months into the full summit. Wow, that's amazing how quickly that's gone by. Some of you may be thinking about collecting up those CCE units in time for the end of the year. I am going to share with you after the session some further details on how you can go about doing that. So I will share that with you at the end of the session. We will also be stopping for questions today. We will have a good 15 minutes or so at the end of the session, and we'll also take a couple around the halfway point. So as I can see many of you doing, type in those those questions into the Q&A box, and I'll be collecting them up as we go. Okay, I am delighted to introduce Mr. Krishna Kumar. Krishna is a pioneer in the world of leadership and executive coaching in India. And he is the founder director of the Intrad School of Executive Coaching, or ISEC, in Bangalore, India, and being a very active member of the global community. Krishna is also the current global president and a member of the governing board of the International Association of Coaching, the IAC. And Krishna's career has included time as a senior corporate executive, entrepreneur. He's a master tennis coaching professional, a professor, and of course, a leadership and executive coach. And I know that he's very keenly engaged in keeping pace with all of the latest research trends in the coaching world. So Krishna, I'm delighted to have this time with you today. Welcome, and I will hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Stacey. And it is wonderful to be here again at WBECS. I have been having the privilege of being part of WBECS for a number of years, and the awesome work that the team does at WBECS to take coaching across the world. So for me, it's a great honor to be here today. And a very warm welcome from Bangalore in India to all of you who are calling in today. It's a good morning, good afternoon, good evening. And for those of us, particularly in India, this is a very auspicious day for us. It's India's biggest festival. We are right in the middle of it. It's the Diwali season. And if any of you by chance listen to sounds of crackers bursting in the background, my apologies in advance, but it's beyond me. And I think we should just look forward to it as something very exciting. So, and a very happy Diwali for those of you from the Indian community who are calling in today. Allow me to start the presentation without further ado. And what I'd like to do today is actually share with you a concept which I've been working on for a number of years. And to begin with, I will start with the definition of coaching as we know it in the International Association of Coaching, to which I belong for quite some time, and it's been a long journey for me there. Coaching in the IAC has been defined as a transformative process for personal and professional awareness, discovery, and growth. A very powerful definition, and I'm sure that those of you who belong to numerous coaching associations across the world would have your own definitions, but I guess many of them kind of segue in. And what I picked up from this definition, which I want to share today, is these words, which was transformative, and then linked to awareness, discovery, and growth. And thinking this through and working through my own personal experience as a business coach for a number of years, coaching people at various levels of organizations, and also out of the corporate world. I'm also a career sports and life coach. I came across this one idea that perhaps this definition could be expanded to include one word, and that word was trust. Trust plays such a significant factor in coaching, as many of you on this call already know. And I wanted to add that little dimension to it, that little element to it. But the dimension could not be restricted to just a word. And trust is something that's so powerful, playing such a brilliant part in the world of coaching, that I wanted to expand on that. And, I'm sure many of us have read books on trust and, applied it in our own coaching practice, that we can add our own, definitions to it. What I've tried to do today is share with you, based on my own, humble experiences in this world, five elements, five dimensions to trust that I think would add value to coaches. I noticed from those of you who logged in earlier, I haven't had a chance to see all the messages in the Q&A box, but I did notice that there were a few of you who had, listened into my pre-summit. So thank you for that. But there were many others who also said they haven't. So I probably will, walk through this presentation, sharing some information that I had shared earlier, quite a bit of it actually. And I, request the patience of those who have listened to me earlier, and perhaps just treat it as a revision of what I spoke. Like I said, trust runs across multiple dimensions. And the five that I'm going to share with you today are those that I think would add value to your coaching practice. It's by no means the end of trust, of course. It's just five additional dimensions to what trust speaks to all of us and how it works specifically in the transformative process. Let me begin with an illustration, and that's an illustration that I'm going to use all the way through today. It's not the illustration I used in the pre-summit, but it's a new one that I, again, worked on. Of course, if for reasons of confidentiality, I haven't used the names of the company, so these are actually just made-up names. And Integral Air is a global leader in the clean air business, and you have been asked to coach a person, who heads their Asia Pacific operations. And he heads, as we can imagine, in this part of the world where I live, with so many regions and so many different countries, a multicultural, diverse team, a very diverse team spread across the region. Now, we is a technology guru, which is not surprising because the nature of the business he's in is very high tech. And being a technology person, he's known to be task-oriented, but a bit lacking on the people skills. And that's the area you are, been assigned to support V as his coach. In your conversations with V, you discover that he is very passionate about environmental issues. He wants to launch this, big strategic regional initiative to transform their businesses. He wants to make a difference fundamentally. Now, the question that I want to ask you, and I'm going to request the help of Stacy for running this poll, and I'm sure she will begin to run it now, is how would you approach the coaching session with me? All you need to do is tick one of these boxes, and then I'll, Stacy will share with me what you have decided on.
Thanks, Krishna, and thank you everyone for your answers coming in. It looks like we are about 80% have chosen the last option, seek a deeper meaning and purpose.
Thank you so much, Stacy. And wow. So yes, it is, it's interesting to see the results. I can see that coming up on my screen. That is not surprising in the least, because we are coaches and that's typically what we would go for in terms of, asking him to work through his vision. And as I said earlier, these polls have no one right answer. Every answer is right. I'm only putting it in a context. So any of you who ticked any one is perfectly fine. And I know very few would have ticked B, quite not surprisingly, because that comes a little later. In the specific context that I'm going to share with you, I'm going to pick the third one of visualizing his intention over and over again. And the reason I'm going to do that is that for me is one of the 5 dimensions of trust. I call that intentionality. And let me share with you again what I mean by intentionality. And I will again want to mention that all the answers were right. In my mind, every one of them could work. I picked this one in the context of the presentation, in the context of transformation, in the context of trust. So intentionality, I'm very fond of saying, is linked to the human potential. It's linked to hope. And more than anything else, it's linked to our dreams. And through our dreams, we fuel passion. And this passion finds purpose, as in the case of V's need to make a difference to the business he was doing, which we will now call the intention. Once he has his intention and visualizes it, most people stop at that and start moving into, the finding deeper meaning and purpose normally is at this level. The key to moving it forward and converting it into reality is this one. It comes to repeated visualization, where you move the intention to what we call intentionality. And the reason I say this is, again, a lot of it links back to my practice as a sports coach. When I have coached people over the years, starting from kindergarten kids, most of them are kindergarten kids, to CEOs, and last year I was even training for some time an Olympian, a former Olympian. So I have, coached people at all levels, and everywhere I see, for those who have the drive to become champions, we see that intentionality plays a part. In fact, coaches are often fond of telling their students that if you really want to achieve your dreams, it's not enough to just dream. It's, you need to put a lot of it into actual practice. And one simple way is an idea that many coaches tell their kids to do and their students to do is write the same dream, maybe in 3 words or 4 words on 10 post-its and stick it all over the place. I mean, stick it on your kit bag, stick it at the inside of your cupboard, stick it on the bathroom mirror, on top of your bed. I mean, wherever it is, you stick it everywhere, and you keep it keeps buzzing in your brain, so to speak. And repeated visualization has the power to move intention to intentionality. It helps us stay with the purpose. So how does this happen? When you look at how you're performing something over time, it's typically comes up in this format. This is a form that we find happening across most people who are engaged in an activity of any kind, whether it's physical or mental or any spiritual, any quest. When you go through in the initial stage, there's a lot of learning, there's a lot of doing, and there's a lot of growing. As we can see from the curve, I mean, this in technical terms is called a sigmoid curve, and this growth is seen for all of us. Any one of us picking up an activity will see this growth happening in our lives. And the initial stages of the growth is just wonderful. I mean, if you were to pick up a new sport or a new musical instrument or a new job or anything, I mean, even when we started becoming coaches, it was fascinating. I mean, the journey you embark on is continuous growth till you finally reach a certain stage at which you find that your work, your performance is tapering off a bit. As you can see at the end of the curve, it kind of dips. And that's a tricky place, because that's the place at which we say your performance plateaus. And this performance plateau is a very, very difficult phase to be stuck in, because that's the phase at which people tend to want to stop doing what they're doing because maybe it doesn't interest them anymore, maybe because it's too easy, it's too difficult, it's too stressful. They have their own reasons for that. Maybe the environment didn't suit them anymore. But at that stage, what happens is we find a dilution of trust. And if the person is not able to overcome that with or without the help of a coach, you would find that they would drop out of that particular project or that activity or that role. You would see them walking away from it. if you investigate people who leave jobs, or you switch, instruments of music that they were learning, or any of those things, you would see this happen at the performance plateau because of a dilution of trust in themselves primarily. But if you overcame that, you could climb to the next plateau till, of course, the sequence would repeat. And the key to it, intentionality, the key to the whole thing is to be able to keep on the curve, to keep climbing up on the path. And at some stage, you actually, towards a certain phase of your life or doing that particular activity, that's the path to being a master at what you do. I mean, whether it's being a coaching master or a master at any other activity, intentionality keeps us on that path. This is actually one of the, having trust in ourselves. This is one of the first dimensions that I wanted to share with you. What I would do, Stacey, is with some help from you, is that perhaps at the halfway mark, I'll take a little pause and, take a few questions. So I'm requesting all those of you on the call, by all means, type in your questions. And I know Stacey is going to do a great job of helping me there. And I will try to answer as many of them as I can halfway through the presentation. Moving on.
Definitely. Thank you.
Yes, Stacey?
Yes, thank you, Krishna. And thanks for sending in all your questions, folks. I am collecting them up here.
Thank you. So if you move from intentionality, what actually could lead to the next part? And what I have listed here of these 5 dimensions, it's interesting that it's not necessarily any linear path. In fact, when I ran my talk for the pre-summit, I had a different sequence in mind. So we could play them in any sequence, in any order. I'm using it here in the context of the little situation that I shared with you about integral air and the person B that you're coaching. And we can change that. So they operate independently, but also together. It's not by any means a linear path that I'm recommending. The next phase, I'd like to call that mobility for trust. What is mobility? And again, I'm linking it back to the situation that we shared. Now V has launched the project. You've been part of it, being with him all the way through. After the initial phase, he's facing a major obstacle that he shares with you, and he's very concerned that it could potentially derail his program. In fact, to the extent that he worries about it, and he even contemplates shutting it down. Now, as V's coach, what approach would you take? Now, this is not a poll so much as a question for you to think about. And I will also share with you some parts of the approach that we could take in a conceptual way. What's actually happening to V at this stage? What's happening to V at this stage is what we would like to say is that I'm calling it conformity. Conformity means that he is now in a zone where he's been doing certain things in a certain way and probably very successfully. When he encounters this particular challenge, this particular bottleneck, this particular difficulty, he worries about it. He worries about moving ahead. He's taking a lot of comfort in the past, because that was where he was very comfortable, even at times when it was uncomfortable. But this is something that's pulling him out of that. And a lot of his time at that stage has been spent in managing the business as he was used to doing. And now he's encountering something that worries him so much that he may as well call it a panic zone. And his fear of failure is so much that he contemplates shutting it down. What should he do at this stage? Firstly, he should be aware of the fact that he is in this phase, of course. Then the key to it is to being able to make him mobile. And mobility comes when you link it back to intentionality. Get him to remember his purpose. Ask him what is it that is affecting him. Below the line, below the plateau, is a zone that I am fond of calling the comfort zone, the relaxed zone. We are very used to using words like, are you in a comfort zone? Perhaps a zone where you're relaxed. Even if you're uncomfortable there. Even if you're uncomfortable there, you could be very uncomfortable where you are. I mean, you're in a traffic jam and still you're in a comfort zone because you know where you're going. It's not the unknown. You work for an organization and it doesn't make you feel very good, but you're still comfortable, though unhappy, because you know where you are. And the other zone is the zone of anxiety and stress, where you are not comfortable at all in that sense, but you feel that you may have bitten off more than you can chew. You probably, try to be ahead of the game. You are, you're not able to cope with the pressures that's coming up. You think back in hindsight, you should have moved slower. And these are areas where, again, people take a call and say, should we perhaps back away? Should we move and do something else? To stay with your purpose, what the coach needs to do here is move beyond the conformity zone, the confirming zone, and move into what's called the learning zone. Or help, we in this case, embrace the future rather than fear it. Help him to look to areas where he could learn and grow and overcome this. It's a mobility of the mind where you feel ready to move or support being moved. That's the second part that we are looking at. And maybe I will take a few minutes pause here and take a couple of questions, if that's fine with you, Stacey.
Absolutely. Thanks, Krishna. So a few folks wanted to have some clarification on what you meant by trust. If we're talking about coach and client, or the client's ability to trust you, or is it trust in yourself?
Okay. I think fundamentally, there are three areas there. One is primarily, I think it's to do with self-belief, trusting oneself, and learning to take the responsibility to move ahead, which is the slide that you're seeing in many ways. So trusting in oneself, having self-belief, learning to be responsible for what you want to do in the future, that's one part of it. The second part of it that I will also be speaking about as we move ahead is getting the trust of others and how you can build trust in your team. And the third one is in the environment. The other aspect that was brought up about getting the trust of the coach, I haven't touched upon that very much because of the simple reason, not because it isn't important, it's because I'm assuming that many people on this call are also very senior coaches and know how to do that. I'm looking at other dimensions beyond what we already do. Building trust in your coachee or your client, I've taken that as a given in this particular case, not that it isn't important. Stacey?
Thank you, Krishna, for that clarification. And I hope that cleared up a few questions that I know a few of you had coming in earlier. So also another one, if you could speak a little further to what you mean by visualization. Deb suggested, do you mean things like using a tangible vision board, or is it more mental visualization? Would things like meditation play a part?
All of that. As a coach, I would leave it to the client to do what suits them best. Vision boards are brilliant. Mental visualization works really well. All of them. And some others we haven't thought of. So the concept of visualization is important. The mechanics of it would be dependent on the coach and the client's comfort levels and their own innovative ideas on what would work for them.
Excellent, thank you. And maybe if we have time, I got one more. Let's see. Some have asked, are we actually losing trust at our peak performance, or is it a case of getting bored and losing interest because your objectives and goals have been met and now you need a new challenge?
That's a wonderful question. And when I spoke about that earlier, and in fact, I can go back to that slide a bit. That's really when you speak about being in the relaxed or comfort zone, and being bored is probably an extreme state of that. So yes, it happens when the challenge no longer excites you, and you have, you've been there, done that, and it's too easy for you, in which case you need to relook. I'm now speaking from the client's point of view. they need to up the challenge, because what they're now doing is no fun anymore. It's too easy. It's absolutely right.
Wonderful. Thank you, Krishna. We have a whole lot of questions here, but I can let you move on if you'd like, and we'll definitely get to a lot more of these towards the end.
Yeah, thank you, Stacey. Yes, in the interest of time, let me move on. I would love to take all the questions, but I guess we have a time problem. So moving to the next phase, which is that of awareness. When I did my presentation last year at WBECS, this was a presentation I did which was called Being Aware That You're Aware. And I have linked it to the concept of trust too, because I see it as being so very important. So what is being aware? And let me begin again with a little poll and get everybody back in being engaged. The question here is, V is now at that stage where he has his vision, he's clear about where he wants to go, he needs the buy-in of his team. But he's discovered over time that he's worked with them, that many often the team members tend to prioritize their goals over the broader team objective, and in effect not operate as well as he would like to as a team. So what could he do? What should he do? I have again set up 4 questions, and Stacey, if you would please run the poll.
There we go, folks. It is running there. If you just take a quick second to answer there. It looks like we've got the majority is encourage the team to know each other, and that's at about almost 40%, and followed closely by number 1 and 2.
Thank you, Stacey. In fact, that's brilliant. That's wonderful, because that's really the way I feel too. That encourage the team to know each other at a personal level is really the key to getting buy-in. What is it that stops us from doing that? What is it that derails a team is an illustration that I had shared earlier in my pre-summit, and I would, for the benefit of those of you who didn't listen in at that time, share it again. So the illustration went like this, that out of the team members that we had, there were 2, one was A and one was B, and A reaches out to B for help, and B says yes. But with less than a few hours left, B finds that A hasn't done the work. So he feels betrayed. He goes to B and he says, work late and please keep your commitment. Now, when he insists on that, what actually happens, and this is, this is probably not what happens all the time, but I'm taking a very specific illustration to show what happens when trust doesn't work. And what happens here is a lot of what I'm sharing with you is in the context of work done by the Arbinger Institute. Many of the people on this call would have probably read about their work or studied it, and it's something that I find very, very powerful, very relevant, so I brought it into my presentation today. The Arbinger Institute's books are The Leadership Through Self-Deception and The Anatomy of Peace. So when A, who's on the right of the screen, says, you must do it, and he complains and he's kind of irritating to B, B then decides that he will have to do it. He doesn't have too much of a choice there. But he no longer starts seeing A as a person, because he's now a very demanding, unreasonable object. And the study says that. So at that point in time, B now perceives A not as a colleague at work or a friend. He starts seeing him as a rather painful object who is insisting on him doing something that he had, found difficult to do. So he's being unreasonable too and demanding. So he does it. But when he does it under protest. He probably does it with some attitude. And A sees that. At which point in time, A also stops seeing B as a person, but as an object who is a bit inconsiderate and self-centered. So from a situation where 2 people were speaking, we then have a conflict situation or a trust diluted situation where 2 objects speak to each other. This is fundamentally the concept. And what happens then is they say that these people fall into what is called a box. And the process is known as self-deception. When one person acts contrary to what he or she should do for someone else, it's called an act of self-betrayal, because it's kind of, B knew that he should have done it, but he didn't. And then when he was forced to do it, he stopped liking A at that point in time. So the words used there were self-betrayal. At which point he has to justify that, and so he sees the world in a different kind of way, which is actually a distorted view of the way reality is. And that distorted reality is the way he justifies himself, and blames the other person for forcing him to do something, but equally justifies the reason for him not doing that by, probably in this case, we can imagine that he says, I have a busy day too. I have my deliverables too. I have my workload. And why can't he understand that? So you start seeing the world in this kind of distorted way, because you began from a position where you didn't actually meet your commitment. And then you enter what is called the box. When you enter the box, the interesting thing is, over time, these boxes become many, and you carry them around with you, kind of, metaphysically. And we all have them. I mean, every one of them has, unless, of course, we have reached that very evolved state, and I'm sure there may be some on this call, but most people I have discovered, particularly when I coach clients in the corporate world, that we see a lot of these boxes. Situations that people have put others in, and thereafter their judgmental view of the other person is through a box. And these boxes are very interesting, because these boxes, what I like to call the conditioned thinking, is thereafter you view the other person through the box, through those lenses, and not the real way. And the lens shows up fears of failure, a number of cases of that, limiting beliefs, biases, and vulnerabilities. So the person no longer sees another person as his colleague who is reaching out to help him, or vice versa. He sees him through this conditioned thinking box. The word conformity comes up again, because you are not able to move your mind. And this causes a lot of trust dilution. The question that we have to address at this part, at this stage, is how does one move beyond? How does one get out of the box? To leave the box is the tricky part. And to leave the box, the fundamental question that we need to know is this: do I know I'm in a box? To know I'm in a box is where awareness comes in. In my previous, like I said, the earlier presentation I gave, I spoke about this really wonderful phrase that the Buddhist monk said, the Thich Nhat Hanh, where he said, awareness is like the sun. When it shines on things, they're transformed. And the word transformation came in here too. The model that I had developed last time, and which I still, use extensively, is a 5-part model spread over these, called awaken, willpower, action, reflection, and engagement. Those of you who are on the call and would like to listen in on this, please do reach out either to me, or I'm sure you can send a mail into WBECS. They have a recording of this talk from last year, and I know they'll be more than happy to share with you the presentation I gave, and I would feel very privileged if you listen to it. Today, I don't have that much time to walk you through the whole thing again, and I'm going to pick up certain elements of the AWARE model. Each one of them stands for one, aspect of it, as you can see on the screen. And I'm going to share with you that particular model, aspects that would probably be very useful in the trust building area. So let me start with that and ask ourselves one big problem when it comes to awareness, which is the word distractions. One of the problems of being aware is dealing with distractions. And it's very easy to be distracted. In fact, one of the biggest challenges we face as a coach is distraction. So How would we deal with distraction is the key. When you talk about distractions, we ask ourselves, where do they come from? There are a million kinds of distractions that we can go through. I mean, as I speak to you, outside in the environment today, it's Diwali and I'm, bombarded by the burst of crackers, and I need to keep that out. I hope that you are not listening to them too. And if you are, I can only say that do enjoy them. But the fact remains that, like that, there are numerous distractions that we encounter on a day-to-day basis, some simple ones, some complex. And when we deal with these complex distractions, we need to find ways to overcome them. It could be as simple as the fact that our minds speak in multiple ways, the voices in our head. As I spoke about last time in my last presentation, this is something that pulls down lots of sports people. Comparisons with others, fears of failure, and so on, anger, and there are many. But let me just take one specific distraction in the context of trust, which I think would be very helpful. And that distraction that I want to share with you is this specific one. Distraction here, I would like to say, is a failure to resolve conflicting choices. More often than not, we have to take a decision. And the decision we have to take will be linked to, even in the context that V is facing about running a project, he may very often run into situations where he may want to have to take a call between one or more choices, both of which look equally interesting. But you got to pick and choose. And when we need to pick and choose this, even when you choose one, your mind keeps going back to, if only I had chosen something else. And how is it that we are able to have that willpower to manage our own mind? This is where the box concept comes in, because more often than not, we are ourselves in these boxes. And self-awareness is one way for us to get out of the box. If you are in a box, let us assume that you are now in a box. You need to know that you are in a box fundamentally. And to be aware that you are in a box, what's the one small technique that we can apply is, again, a technique that I have used extensively, with my clients in both at work, at play, in the sports field, and so on, is the element of action and reflection. So when you are caught in a situation where you believe that, it's a difficult place to be in, rather than remaining there, this is the time when you can take a pause and reflect on where you are and then take the next step. The famous coach, I'm sure many of you would have studied his work, Tim Galway, who started his career as a tennis coach, and he's someone I have an enormous regard and respect for. He had publicized a particular methodology which I think works brilliantly. I've tried it a lot of times, and that he calls the stop technique. Very simple, very powerful. For those of you who haven't been exposed to it, let me quickly share it. It means that whenever you are in a state of difficulty, when perhaps you think you could be being put in a box or finding yourself there, you need to take a step back. That's reflection. Think through where you are at the moment, what position you're taking there, what's happening to you. Take that pause to organize your thoughts and proceed. Decide on where you want to go and proceed. Simple enough. The process is very simple, difficult to practice, I can assure you. Very powerful if it works, when it works. I've seen it work more often than not. To give you an example out of the business world, I recommend a lot of it to my students on the tennis court. When they do badly, they played a point badly, and they're about to get ready for their next point, I tell them to use a stop. And even top level players do that often. I mean, when you see tennis players bouncing balls before they begin to serve, it's a kind of a mini stop that they're taking to settle their thoughts in. This is a very simple illustration. I'm sure there are lots more complex aspects that we can do in life and in the world of business, but I wanted to share some very simple ones. As I move ahead, I'd like to take a pause again here and ask your help, Stacey, for any more questions that have come in, and maybe answer a few more before I move to the next part.
Absolutely. Thanks, Krishna. Let's see, we do have a number of questions. Going back to earlier in the presentation, let's see. Beck asked if trust dissolution is an essential part of the performance time curve, or is it possible to create an awareness and a shift before that happens?
Oh, super. I mean, I'm very grateful for that question. I think it's an excellent question. And the word is trust dilution is what I use. And yes, as I mentioned earlier, all these elements run together. I've kept them apart for the benefit of explaining or sharing the thoughts here. But awareness can run through intentionality, through mobility, and everything works with everything. So as you are on the curve, awareness would be a wonderful thing to have. When you plateau, it would be wonderful to be aware. So yes, everywhere, to answer that question.
Thanks, Krishna. Beck, I hope that answered your question. Kathleen Naylor asked earlier, when you're speaking about tips to get through the plateau and renew trust in yourselves, what can we do to rebuild our resilience to reignite?
This is I think I need to have the question again a little bit, the one before reignite and resilience. If you could repeat
Sure.
that, Stacey.
Yeah, so Kathleen asked, what can we do to help us get through the plateau and renew trust in ourselves? I know you spoke to that a little earlier, and she gave the example of how can we rebuild our resilience to reignite ourselves.
Right. I think that's where a coach can add a lot of value. I mean, that's one of the things that I always share and say, that when people are on a plateau and feel stuck in what they're doing, or disillusioned, or self-doubting in themselves, that's where coaching can be of great help. If you're not so evolved as to be able to self-coach, then I think we as coaches, the community of coaches who are there with us today, I think that's the point at which we can add tremendous value to build back that resilience in the client. So that's the answer I would give at this stage. And what steps to take, I really don't know. I think it would be case-to-case basis. It would be, that's not something that we as coaches would like to recommend. But yes, that's the stage at which to be aware that you're on the plateau, that you're feeling stuck. A coach could be of great help in getting them to the stage of mobility.
Wonderful, thank you. Constance has asked, she'd like to know how brain science is related to what we're speaking about. How are our neural pathways and the development of habits related to intentionality?
I'm no guru on that space. In fact, I'm doing a little bit of study myself. And I'm sure there are other speakers in WBECS, some of whom I know very well, who are the gurus on neurosciences and on the neural networks and pathways. So I'll be a little nervous answering it from that point of view. But let me speak from the point that I am more comfortable with, and which would be that, when you come back to that part, it's really all about our need to be mobile, to have the mobility of mind. And if we are having that because mobility of mind, the opposite is conformity. When the question came up about habits, the first word that came to my mind is conformity. Habits are what root us in conformity. And to be able to break that habit, good or bad or neutral, we need to have that ability to embrace the future, to be mobile in our mind. That's what I would like to say at this stage.
Thank you very much. Do we have time for a couple more? Would you like to take some more now?
Yeah, maybe one more, and then I will move on.
Excellent. Andre asked earlier, mentioned that lack of self-esteem causes also a lack of self-trust. It's dominant within a psychology scope, calling for different competencies and clinical resources. how would you differentiate? Where would you say the boundary is between coaching and psychology on this issue of self-trust?
Some of these questions are so very powerful. So thank you very much. I mean, I'm learning as much as I'm sharing, so I don't have all the answers. But all I would like to say here is that there's a thin line, as all of us on this call know. There's a thin line between the area of counseling and the area of coaching. When we talk about self-esteem and self-trust, it's very easy to slip into the other part. And as coaches, we become cognizant of the fact that we would like to remain in the space where coaching applies. And if we feel that there is so much dilution and there's so much of, a drop in self-esteem that it moves into the sphere of a psychologist, then we need to step back. I mean, that's all I would say at this point in time. It's something that as we as coaches need to be aware about ourselves.
Thanks, Krishna. I think that's a very good answer to the hit. I know it's a complex field. I'll let you continue if you just wouldn't mind sharing with us the book titles you referred to earlier, and I will be able to type them into the chat box for people to copy down. I believe a couple of folks have asked if it was Arbinger Research. If you wouldn't mind just repeating those book titles for me.
Yeah, I have used and that part of my presentation, the work done. The book is called Leadership Through Self-Deception, and the work was done by the Arbinger Institute. I mean, Arbinger beginning with the word A and not H. That is one book. And the other book, I'm sure, is very familiar to all the senior coaches or any other coaches on this call, is the work done by Timothy Galway on the inner game.
Wonderful. Thanks, Krishna. I will post it in the chat box for you folks in just 1 second.
Okay, so I'm going to move on. Thank you, Stacey, for all the support there. And as I have said on more than one occasion, this is not a linear path. It's a path that uses all these elements: intentionality, mobility, and being aware. We move to another part another dimension that I'm particularly very keen on. And I know that quite a lot of questions came in earlier. I'm sure there were many more, but the ones that were picked up talked about neurosciences and so on. And active empathy is an interesting area. So before I dive into that, let me ask Stacey's help again to put up this poll, which is that we, with your help as his coach, has now moved ahead and his team is empowered. He's now facing a new challenge on his project, which is now with an external challenge, which is that one of his key clients has set a tough conditions to accept the new program. What should he do to negotiate it? So there are 4.
Thank you, everyone, for your answers. Nearly 90%, Krishna, would answer appreciate the client's situation.
Yeah, I'm not surprised at all. I mean, I was anticipating that. Thank you very much. And it's so helpful to have that result because it's exactly what I wanted to hear. And the reason I wanted to do that is because I'm going to expand a little bit on why that has happened. And a lot of it is also to do with the fact that we spoke about how people are in boxes. And when you are in this box situation, you tend not to be able to listen to the other person because you're so caught up worrying about yourself. And when you're worrying about your position, and this is something where coaches can do a great deal of work. In coaching, we have often told that listening skills are really, really important. We've been told that we have to be, listen intensely. We've been told you have to do engaged listening, with your mind, your body. We've been all coach training schools speak about that. But then here we talk, I'm very aware that I'm talking to a lot of you coaches who have tremendous years of experience and knowledge. So all I want to do is share this with you in a slightly different way by saying Can we take listening to another level? Can we take listening to a level where I'd like to call that active empathy, which in other words is deep listening, deep compassionate listening. The difference here is broken up into various parts. These parts, the first part is perception. Where would we use listening? Now, more often than not, the beginner coach tends to listen and for understanding, tends to listen for, in a non-judgmental way. That's very, very good, and that's a very good first level listening. But as we move into higher levels of coaching and deeper levels of coaching, the word here is deeper, you come to a stage where you listen at a level which is, I think, probably 2 or 3 levels deeper than the ordinary level, which is that of being perceptive. And to be perceptive, you need to listen beyond and understand what are the boxes that are blocking the client. Very often, the aha moments that clients come up with, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with thanks to your coaching efforts, would be thinking back your ability to navigate through the client's boxes. In doing that, another interesting thing happens. You need to be sensitive because we are human and we have our own boxes. And that awareness of my own box and how it might block my understanding of the client's box is the tricky one. Now, this requires us to do a lot of internal work and practice, because when we are trying to build trust, both these elements work together. The client has his boxes, we ourselves, being human, have our own boxes. And how can we be sensitive to our box and at the same time, navigate the client's box too? To do that, we also need to build in something which is very interesting. Behavioral sciences have come up with this phrase called unconditional positive regard. And I must also tell you where I picked this up. I was reading this book, and it's a fascinating book written by a guy who was the former FBI, who headed the former FBI hostage negotiating cell, and he wrote a book called Never Split the Difference. But in that, he came up with this saying that when you are negotiating with somebody, you don't actually have in hostage negotiating a situation where you have win-win. There's only win for him, because if he doesn't win, we are talking about a life and death situation. It's not a business proposition where I can say, I'll give you something and I'll take something back. I mean, we don't have a situation where you can take half a person. So, what he spoke about then, saying that when I deal with people who are, the world considers them to be terrible people who have done this terrible act, at the same time, I need to win. And to do that, I have over the years discovered that these words, unconditional positive regard, has worked in my favor. And I thought that was fascinating. Unconditional positive regard for the person, whoever he may be, was a starting point. And to do that, you need to be aware of our own box and also figure out where the other person is in terms of what puts him on that particular phase. Once we have done that, and we now come back to lesser situations, and fortunately much, it's not less important, but probably different kind of thing where we don't talk about life and death so much, but we speak about compassion. And compassion for me in the world of coaching is probably the big thing. People, when they talk about being empathetic, compassion takes one step forward and says, I listen to you, I understand you, but I'm going to do one thing more. I'm going to step forward and help you. Now, to do that, we need to do a few things. And the methodology here we call transposing. Trying for some time to walk in the other person's shoes. I mean, the American expression would be wear the other person's moccasins. But fundamentally, walk in the other person's shoes and ask these questions. Ask yourself these questions. We don't have to agree to anything, but we need to be able to ask the questions. And do I know what your challenges are? Am I adding to these challenges in any way? Are my boxes blocking solutions? How do I feel about supporting you, and how can I help? And once we ask the questions, we can move into the next step, which is again a very, very difficult step, but it's a very powerful step, which is that we stop resisting. We actually reach out and try and help the other person. Transposing would happen instinctively. So active empathy in building trust, I feel, is a very powerful mechanism. The last of the dimensions that I'm sharing with you, I had expanded on in quite some depth when I ran my presentation some months ago, the pre-summit. And I like to call it the trim tab. It's an expression that has fascinated me for quite some time, and it fascinated me because I'm a fan of this person called Buckminster Fuller. He was an innovator, a philosopher, an architect, many things. I mean, many of you would have heard the name. And in fact, when Buckminster Fuller passed on, I mean, even on his tombstone, on his grave, he has written out there, "Call me trim tab." I mean, he found it so powerful. So what exactly is a trim tab? A trim tab, as many of you can find out, I mean, I've just taken a kind of a schematic sketch on the top of the top left corner of the screen, is really a small piece of metal which is attached to the rudder of a ship or an ocean liner. And this small piece of metal has the power to move the rudder, which has the power to move this enormous vessel, which can weigh many tons. So, a few pounds, a few kilograms of metal actually has the power to move the entire vessel because of the technology and the engineering and the physics that apply there. So what he took was, he went beyond the physics when he called the trim tab, and that the trim tab of transformation here says, you and me as coaches, as individuals, can we apply ourselves to be trim tabs of transformation with our clients? And if we were to do that, what would actually happen is, leveraging trust, you can actually propel a person to achieving what they want. In the illustration that I gave during the pre-summit, I spoke about an example shared for me by a colleague of mine in Hong Kong. Her name is Bonnie Chan, and Bonnie one day came to this realization. She said, for many years, I have been coaching people in mainland China, sitting in Hong Kong, and I have never seen them. And we did all our coaching on the phone, and Bonnie's a master coach and a wonderful person. So she was thinking back on that and said, I mean, for all I know, they may be visually impaired. I really don't know who they are. And that thought struck her that perhaps we could do something about this element. And she then started working with the visually impaired to make them coaches. Her, the basis of her philosophy there was that if you have lost one of your senses, you have a heightened sense in all the others, which I think was a wonderful way to begin. And she had another premise. She said, people who traditionally seek help are now, if they become coaches, are going to give help. So help seeker became a help giver. And so for that path, she became, in her mind, a trim tab. And I'm very happy to share that she was able to certify over a 3-year period, sticking to her intention, a team of visually impaired coaches who now sit in Hong Kong cafes coaching people. So they had a sense of satisfaction there, and a sense and a feeling of growth. So that was Bonnie's experience. In the case of this specific example of V, I have listed down certain elements that worked in his favor. When he had self-doubt, he was able to overcome it. The coach moved him to learning stages. He was able to manage distractions, navigating his and others' boxes, and finally making a difference. So the question I now leave you with, and then I move on to taking questions, is that how could we fit it into frameworks? All of you have studied coaching, I'm sure, through multiple frameworks. I come from this organization called the ISEC, where we have what's called 9 masteries. So let me try and link it to the 9 masteries. Intentionality links to these 2. Mobility would link to 2 other masteries. Awareness is that processing in the present. Mobility was inviting possibility and expanding potential. Intentionality was clarifying, setting intentions. Active empathy took us to engage listening and expressing. And being a trim tab was support systems and building trust. So if you this model that I have, the IAC's 9 masteries, what I have shared with you could very comfortably fit into those. I'm sure the 5 dimensions I'm sharing can fit into other coaching models that you'd like to use them with. And in conclusion, all I want to ask you is this question before I take questions from you is, how can you be a trim tab in your own practice, in the world at large? So over to you, Stacey, and happy to take a few questions now.
Thank you, Krishna, and thank you for some really powerful visuals and metaphors. I know I've been finding them very useful. So a number of folks have asked if they can see, I think they were looking for slide 29, Transform Through Trust, when you highlighted V's pathway. If you're able to just go back a couple of slides, I believe that is the one that a few people are looking for. Perhaps that one or this one here. And folks, you will have access to the slide deck. Then ESL members will have access to this. All the resources are uploaded about 24 hours from now, so they'll be inside your membership area. Okay, and thank you for all of your wonderful questions and sharing of resources with each other. I always love to see that level of engagement taking place throughout the session. Let's see. Robert asked us earlier, Krishna, how do you isolate your own trust issues? For example, if you don't trust your client.
If you don't trust your own client. Okay, I think I need a little more expansion on that one, because that's a little, I would say that's unusual. Okay. Because once you have decided on taking a client, I think that's fundamental that we would move towards a stage of trust with the client or not move ahead at all. I would, personally speaking, I would find it very difficult to coach someone if we didn't have mutual trust.
Wonderful, thanks. And Robert, we do have time if you're still with us. If you are able to send in a clarification for that, we can answer that in just a little bit. Let's see. Rajiv asked earlier how we differentiate the plateau with the case of distrust, with the state of disruption.
You know, when you are on a plateau, it's a stage at which you don't see progress. You feel, I used the expression before, we feel stuck. Everybody wants to grow, in multiple directions and dimensions. And when you find yourself stuck there and not moving forward, that's when we start having issues of self-doubt. And that's when we start questioning ourselves. We question ourselves sometimes. We also question others. We question the environment. We question what we are doing. And all that builds up. And that's when you start actually either doing one of two things. Either you start performing very badly, or you move to doing something else. So one of the two things happen. And that's what leads to this dilution. The result is one of the two. It's always there.
Thanks, Krishna. Thank you for that. Let's see. Mahesh asked, how would you apply this model to team coaching? Would it be any different?
Well, the example I did give was for team coaching, Mahesh. And, in team coaching, I broke it down to a case of A and B. And it is very, very relevant to coaching teams. Trust in teams is really, I would say, and I'm sure many of us on this call are very aware of that too, that a team can perform only if trust is built. And a lot of what we are sharing out here is either a one-on-one or a group activity. And all these elements can make a difference to strengthening your team is all I would say. And I could go on specifically in each element, but I think looking back, listening back to what I would have said, it would come through in place. Thank you.
Thanks, Krishna. Linda's got a great question here. She started by saying that unconditional positive regard is from Carl Rogers, one of her guiding principles for life, one of my guiding principles for my life, especially in coaching. What do you do with a client who says, I am not coachable, and they are very proud of it?
I wouldn't coach that person. I think that's one of the first elements of coaching is don't coach a person who doesn't want to be coached. So there's very little we can do about that. In the context of negotiating, it would be a little different. But in the context of coaching, where the other person has decided not to be coached, I think it would be in our best interest not to move forward, or we probably get hurt. I mean, that's the way I see it. I hope that resonates with others too.
Absolutely. Let's see, Robert, I'm just trying to find it here now, clarified his question from earlier when talking about how do you isolate your own trust issues. Instead of saying don't trust your client, perhaps a better way to define that would have been not having confidence in your client. How do you isolate your trust issue from the rest?
I like the word confidence. That clarifies it. Thank you, Robert. I mean, so the person is he's losing confidence in himself is what I read this as, lack of self-confidence, which is really, in my eyes, a distraction. It is both a combination of conformity and not being self-aware. So the coach helps him move beyond that. And that would make all the difference is what I would say here. I don't know if I'm been able to add to what Robert asked, but that's the way I would see it.
Thank you. Geraldine asked us too, thanking you for a great session. Can see how this coaching approach can really help. But in between sessions, how can you support your client? Would you do things like send prompts or reminders?
If the client wanted me to, if the client felt it was helpful, personally, I'm a believer in that I would follow the client rather than try to be too proactive because I have seen, and again, this is very open to conversation. People are very proactive when they come and ask you for help, but when you offer it, they tend not to use it. So, to answer the question, I would definitely be very happy to do that, but I would wait for my client to request me for support in those areas.
Excellent, thank you. Let's see. Christina asked, how is the best way to distinguish between a lack of trust in individuals versus a lack of confidence in employees' performance, i.e. there is trust but not performance?
This is a different topic in itself, and I think this is a great question too, where we are talking about trust but poor performance. So while the person has a trust in you, a trust in themselves, and probably trusting in the environment, they are not performing well enough. So the question we need to ask is, on the path that we showed, are they in a stage where they are probably finding the challenge is not very interesting for them, or it is too stressful? So the coach needs to investigate that part. And if it is something that is, the challenge is a little too much for them, they need to dilute the challenge and get them to perform better. Or if they're doing something that is very, very difficult, reduce it. If it's something that is very, very easy, increase the challenge. Get them more engaged. The key to it is engagement. In the AWARE model, I would be very very pleased if they had a chance to listen to my presentation, where I didn't touch this time on the engagement part, but the question that comes up is really linked to the E for engage. And once you get the person engaged, performance is bound to happen.
Excellent, thanks, Krishna. Kim has asked if you could just speak a little more to how to help clients move beyond those distractions you touched on earlier.
Yeah, again, I will definitely answer that, and I would really, feel very happy again if they listened into the previous presentation, because it comes under that context. Great. What are distractions? Thanks. I'm sorry.
So that's great. If we can you're
Okay.
happy to move on if you want to do so, if that's
Yeah.
addressed in your previous presentation.
No.
Folks, I do have some links as well for those I will share with you.
Thank you. And actually, distractions, it's a nice topic by itself. I mean, what are distractions? I mean, distractions are stuff that, hold you back from doing what you want to do. It's simple enough. Uh, it could be the most simple things. And if I think we have the time for me to maybe share a little small story that I can here. There was this person who was very keen on being enlightened. And so he went to this guru sitting in the Himalayas and he said, Guru, I need you to enlighten me and please teach me this, the mantra that you have that will take me to the highest levels of knowledge. So the guru then tells him that, look, okay, I can teach you that, but before you do that, I need you to go and have a dip in some icy, the river with icy water, and then, you have a dip there and you get back here. So this man goes there and has a dip in the icy lake or river and he's freezing and he comes back and says, now please tell me what you have in mind. So he shares this 2-word mantra with him, but he says, you have to say this mantra twice a day for 40 days. And when you say it, you must not say it. At the time you say it, you must not think of monkeys. So the man feels very thrilled. He says, that's all, and I'll become enlightened. He says, absolutely. Just go there and you say it 2 times a day, 40 days. And every time you say it, don't think of monkeys. And so the man goes away and he tries it, but try as he would, every time he says those mantras, images of hundreds of monkeys come into his head. And he absolutely fails in that and he goes back. Now, this is really fundamentally what distractions do to us. I mean, I'm sharing something which may be a little off track here, but fundamentally this is what comes into play, because the fact that the guru told him about something made that image come powerfully into his head, far more powerfully than the mantra that he was searching for. And this is what pulls us down in our lives. I mean, we have a very clear path that we want to go on, and all the time we are hit by distractions. When I spoke about I want this, I want this, I want this, this is either it's material or it's not material. It could be that I want to buy this house, I want to buy a car, I want to do something, or I need promotions. I mean, it's always I want. But in the process of these wants, they overpower us. And more often than not, they are conflicting. So managing distractions, the techniques for that is to be able, the stop technique is extremely powerful. Another technique which is very powerful is practicing the power of focusing. Focusing is actually not very easy. I mean, you need to be able to, awareness is a very broad word, but within awareness, you can come into areas like paying attention and then concentration and at the highest levels of being focused. So practicing focus, being focused on a specific task is one great way to manage distractions. So I know I went on a bit of a digression there, but I hope it was helpful in some way. Thank you.
No, that's wonderful. Thanks, Krishna. We've had a few folks asking about that topic, so I really appreciate the example there. Let's see, this is a long one, so bear with me. Deb asked a follow-up to the question from earlier about what do you do with someone who's uncoachable. She acknowledged that, obviously the first choice for you as a coach for sure is that don't work with them. But let's see, if it was someone who needed coaching, for example, a manager within a department or a company, they're just not open to it. In other words, it's critical to the team's success that this person makes some changes, or they'll need to be let go. So how would you recommend approaching that situation? Perhaps would it be a team building exercise, or would you have more of a candid sit down sort of intervention approach? In any suggested approaches for that situation?
It's weird, but I'm actually facing a situation like that right now. I mean, with a client of mine, so I can relate to that enormously. And I'm not sure whether Deb has a similar situation, but perhaps we are in sync on that. And I would focus on the fourth point, of active empathy, and I would sit down ideally with the client and or the potential client and do some very deep listening to figure out what could be the boxes that hold that person back from accepting coaching. And that's probably one approach I would take. You know, that's the first thing that comes to my mind within the dimensions that I have shared with you.
Excellent, thank you. And that's actually quite uncanny that you are facing a similar situation. So it's a timely question. Let's see, we've got a number of questions here, I think, folks. So I did post the links in the chat box for those of you that are wishing to either access Krishna's pre-summit session. Most of you have access to that in your membership area for this year, and also the 2016 presentation on being aware. I think it'll be a great supplement to today's session if you haven't viewed it already. Krishna, we've got a lot of thanks coming in here as well for some very practical advice.
Oh, thank you so much, and I feel very privileged to receive those thanks from our community of coaches. So thank you very much for that.
Wonderful, and we do have a couple more minutes, folks. If you have any further questions, I will post a link in just a second on how to contact Krishna. I will put that in the chat box in just a moment once I get done here. Thank you all. Thank you all for all of your wonderful compliments coming through right now. Let me see. Nicole had just a clarifying question earlier. So when you talk about the box, is this the way that you look at the person in the world, i.e. a paradigm?
This is a very interesting question, actually. When you link it up to a paradigm, that's a new way of looking at things. Actually, the box, when we look at it, is yes, it is a paradigm shift. It is a paradigm shift, but it's not a positive paradigm shift. It's being in a box is a negative thing, as it's pretty obvious to all of us. So the whole idea is to navigate through those boxes the person has is the first step, and the second step is to help that person leave the box. By making them aware that they are in those boxes. So yes, there is a paradigm shift at your end as a coach, and there is also going to be a paradigm shift taking place on the client's end. Yes.
Wonderful. Okay. Thanks, Krishna. Thank you, everyone, for all of your. A lot of people are thanking you for your authenticity as well, Krishna. Let's see. And yes, and happy Diwali as well. We're loving hearing the celebrations in the background. It's actually being listened to.
I know. I never expected that I would have a presentation with crackers in the background. So I'm, maybe there was celebration somewhere in the space above us. And so thank you so much. And what I would say is that, Stacey, thank you for being a wonderful host. Thank you, everybody who's been on this call. For being listening to me patiently, for your wonderful questions, because I learned enormously from your questions too, as much as I hope you benefited from the thoughts that I shared with you. I do hope to, that many of you will connect with me and, grow the world of coaching. Thank you very much again. And back to you, Stacey, for wrapping up.
Absolutely, we're delighted to have you with us, Krishna. And like you said earlier, folks, he's one of our veterans. This is the 6th